The galaxy kneeled. Earth broadcast one frequency at 3:17 a.m. HFY. In the Meridian Assembly, certainty had weight. It had texture. You could feel it in the way the delegates moved, the slow, deliberate arc of Kelvani arms, the sharp pivot of Zethari torsos, the low subsonic hum the Vrelish emitted when they reached consensus. Certainty was not an emotion in this chamber, it was infrastructure. It was the foundation upon which 2,634 delegates from 41 civilizations had built their authority, their hierarchies, their unquestioned right to decide the fates of worlds they had never visited, for peoples they had never met. Archregent Zesek stood at the platform. He had stood at platforms before, 212 of them across 186 cycles of service. He had watched civilizations petition from below. He had watched them argue. He had watched them beg. In all of that time, he had learned one thing with the certainty that his species reserved only for biological imperatives. The Meridian Assembly did not make mistakes. It made decisions. The distinction, he had always believed, was everything. The chamber was vast enough to swallow weather systems. Its walls were carved from the living stone of Velmara Prime, a planet that had been terraformed specifically to house this body, a planet that existed for no other purpose, whose entire biosphere had been engineered to serve the Assembly's atmospheric requirements. The concentric rings of delegate stations curved upward from the central platform in perfect mathematical progression, each tier precisely 1.7 meters higher than the one below it, a geometry that ensured every delegate could see the speaker at the center while also seeing every other delegate in the chamber. The architects who had designed it 3 centuries ago had understood something fundamental. In a body like this, being seen was as important as seeing. Accountability required visibility. The 2,634 delegates were arrayed in those rings now, locked into hierarchy, locked into the precise positioning that protocol demanded, each one waiting for Zesek to speak. And in the silence before he spoke, the chamber hummed with the specific quality of certainty that preceded major decisions. Not anticipation, not excitement, the deep, settled frequency of a conclusion already reached. Earth will be severed, he said. His voice moved through the chamber via the dual resonance chambers embedded in the platform's architecture, a sound that had commanded subsectors for 186 cycles, that had shaped treaties and ended conflicts and redirected the flow of interstellar commerce as casually as a river bends around stone. It was a voice that had never doubted itself. It carried that absence of doubt now. They have chosen not to integrate. They have chosen not to ask for seats at this table. They have chosen silence. He paused, let the words settle. Let the delegates absorb the specific texture of what was being said, not accusation, not grievance, but the clinical language of administrative consequence. Earth had been offered the standard integration package 17 times across 40 years. 17 times they had declined. Politely, efficiently, and perfectly translated formal language, but declined nonetheless. They had participated in concordance trade networks. They had signed the auxiliary membership protocols. They had contributed personnel to joint research facilities and sent observers to assembly sessions, but they had never petitioned for a seat. Never submitted the sovereignty matrix, never accepted the surveillance and reporting requirements that came with full membership. The Assembly had interpreted this consistently and unanimously as primitive reluctance, a species not yet ready for the responsibilities of galactic citizenship. There was no malice in this interpretation. There was something perhaps more dangerous, condescension so complete it had forgotten its own assumptions. The vote was called. The delegates moved through their confirmation gestures, the 3-fingered press of the Kelvani, the bioluminescent flash of the Vrelish, the quiet spoken affirmation of the 17 humanoid species who had joined the concordance in the last 2 centuries. The count was swift. The technology was precise. 2,089 in favor, 506 against. Earth was isolated from 9 sectors of interstellar commerce. The embargo would take effect in 3 hours and 52 minutes. It was final. By the time it took effect, the human ambassador would still not know. She had not been invited to this session. The 506 who had voted against said nothing. This was protocol. The Assembly did not debate its outcomes. It deliberated before the vote. After the vote, there was only implementation. Something flickered in the chamber's lights. A moment of instability, power draw, perhaps, or a fluctuation in the atmospheric regulators that maintained the precise mix of gases that 41 different species required to breathe simultaneously. Zesek noticed it. His antennae registered the shift in electromagnetic frequency before his visual cortex processed the dimming. He filed it away as maintenance concern. He did not know in that moment that the broadcast signal was already arriving. He did not know that the flicker was not a malfunction. He did not know that the deliberation was already over, and not in the way he had assumed. I have to tell you something about what patience can do, because Earth had learned long ago that silence could be a kind of strength, not the silence of those who have nothing to say, the silence of those who are waiting for exactly the right moment to say everything. 3 hours and 52 minutes earlier, Cascadia Operations Hub, Earth. 200 meters underground, camouflaged as a geothermal research facility, hidden beneath 6 kilometers of Arctic ice that had been deliberately preserved and reinforced over 17 years of careful ecological management. The facility did not appear on any concordance survey. It did not appear in Earth's own public infrastructure records. The 47 personnel who staffed it at any given time had all signed agreements that their families believed they were stationed at a climate monitoring station in northern Canada. The deception was not comfortable. Dr. Shen Voss had made her peace with it 3 years ago. In the same week, she had made her peace with what today would require. She was reading the Assembly's real-time feed when the vote came down. The feed was itself a small miracle of unauthorized access. Earth had no official presence at the Assembly session, but the quantum relay infrastructure that Earth had quietly helped maintain for 18 years included, embedded in its architecture, a passive monitoring function that had been logging every transmission passing through the Concordance's communication network since the day the first relay station had been installed. The Assembly believed their deliberations were private. They were, in the technical sense that Earth had never transmitted the data to any external party, but Earth had been listening and recording for nearly 2 decades. Voss set down her coffee. It was cold. It had been cold for an hour, and she had been finishing it in small sips every time she remembered it existed, the way people do when they are waiting for something enormous. She finished what remained now in a single swallow. The scar on her left temple caught the overhead light as she reached for the secure line, a thin line of silver-white tissue that ran from her hairline to the top of her ear, the souvenir of a debris impact during the construction of Relay Station Gamma, 11 years ago. She had been there personally in the orbital scaffolding when a micrometeorite had punched through the station's unfinished hull. She had sealed the breach with her own kit while the evacuation alarms were still sounding. She had not mentioned the incident in her official report. Commander Cale Wren answered on orbital command within 2 seconds. He was a lean man with the specific quality of stillness that people develop after years of working in environments where unnecessary movement consumed oxygen. He had been awake for 19 hours. He would not sleep for another 12. Is the network locked? Voss asked. Frequency 7.3 and all secondary channels are green, Wren said. 52 relay stations confirmed operational. 0 interference on any monitored band. We're broadcasting into silence on our end, and every node is ready to amplify the moment we transmit. Captain Tess Wren reported from Relay Station Alpha, her voice carrying the slight compression of quantum-encrypted transmission. 720 personnel in position across all installations. Dr. Voss, we are ready. 720 people. Voss thought about that number for a moment. 720 people who had spent between 3 and 18 years building, maintaining, expanding, and concealing the infrastructure that Earth had decided, very quietly, to weave into the fabric of the Concordance's operations. They had done it under cover of auxiliary membership protocols, civilian infrastructure exemptions, joint research agreements, and 17 different categories of bilateral technical cooperation. They had done it with the particular patience of a species that had learned, from very bitter historical experience, that the best way to change a system was not to attack it from outside, but to become indispensable to it from within. The transmission crystal sat on Voss's desk, obsidian dark, approximately the size of a human fist, warm to the touch even in the climate-controlled chill of the underground facility. Inside its quantum lattice structure, encoded in layers of coherent light and molecular memory, was a message, 1,934 words in 47 languages, recorded in the same room 3 years before, when Voss had sat alone at 3 in the morning and spoken into a recording system because she had known, with a certainty that frightened her, that this day would come. She had not told anyone about that recording for 6 months. She had simply kept it, refined it, sat with it in the small hours of many mornings, listening to her own voice saying things she was not yet sure she was ready to say. The patience required to hold something that powerful and not deploy it, to watch it sit on her desk through 4 different assembly votes that had gone against Earth's interests, through 2 diplomatic incidents that had made the Assembly's contempt viscerally clear, through the quiet rage of colleagues who had wanted to act sooner, that patience had been the hardest thing she had ever maintained. The crystal did not feel like a weapon. She had been clear about this from the beginning, in every planning meeting, in every argument with the people who had wanted a different kind of response. This was not a weapon. A weapon was designed to destroy. This was designed to make visible. The distinction was everything, and she had staked her entire strategy on the assembly being capable of understanding it. She was not certain they were. She had made her peace with that uncertainty too. Voss looked at the countdown timer on her screen, 3 hours and 47 minutes until the embargo took effect. By that time, either the galaxy would be listening, or it would not, or it would have no choice. Voss had spent 3 years calculating the precise moment. It was not an arbitrary calculation. She had analyzed 18 years of assembly operational data, 9 years of communication pattern studies, and consulted with 4 xenopsychologists who specialized in collective decision-making and non-human cognition. The conclusion they had reached, independently and then together, was consistent. The window was 3:24 a.m. Earth Standard Time. At that hour, the assembly would be in its administrative pause, the 2-hour period between formal sessions when delegates reviewed overnight summaries, when the formal hierarchies relaxed slightly, when all channels were open and active but no single authority had a hand on any particular frequency. It was the moment when the network was most receptive and least controlled. The message would arrive not as an interruption but as an ambient event, something that simply began to be there, the way weather arrives, without announcement or permission. She typed the final authorization code, 19 characters, a palindrome, a reference to a Greek mathematician who had died in a city under siege, killed, according to the story, because he was unwilling to abandon the geometric figures he was studying on the ground even when a soldier stood over him. The mathematician had said, "Give me a lever long enough and a place to stand and I will move the world." Voss had always found the story instructive. He had not moved the world. He had died in a moment of unnecessary stubbornness. But the lever, the concept of the lever, the mathematical principle underlying it, had outlasted him by 2 millennia and counting. She pressed enter. The code traveled through 12 encrypted nodes buried in the Concordance's own communication infrastructure, moving at the speed of quantum entanglement through relay points that the Assembly's own technical teams had installed with Earth's assistance, and then forgotten were maintained by Earth personnel. Captain Vren received it at Relay Station Alpha at exactly 3:24 a.m. Cascadia local time. "Sequence locked," she said, and there was something in her voice that Voss recognized, the specific quality of a breath held for 3 years finally beginning to release. 11 minutes to broadcast start. This was not a military action. Voss wanted to be clear about this, even though there was no one in the room to hear her. She said it anyway, quietly to herself. This is not a military action. This is a decision to be heard. Every monitor in Cascadia Operations Hub showed the same readout. Channels locked, technicians in position across all 52 relay stations, 14 satellites synced, 5 deep space listening arrays standing by. The Assembly's own systems, the infrastructure that Earth had spent 18 years weaving into the Concordance's operations, the systems that the Concordance had come to depend on without ever acknowledging the dependency, would now carry the message they were about to receive. The web that Earth had quietly built was about to reveal itself by vibrating. Voss stood, her hands were steady. She had been waiting for exactly 1,095 days, 3 years of invisible labor, 3 years of patience maintained against considerable pressure, compressed into this moment. The crystal was warm in her hand. At 3:24 a.m., her recorded voice emerged from the orbital lattice. It was calm, it was professional. There was no anger in it, no grievance, no accusation, no threat. It had been recorded 3 years before, which meant that the deliberation in her voice was real. She had chosen these words with time and care, and that deliberateness was audible. This was not the voice of someone reacting to an insult. This was the voice of someone who had been preparing for a very long time to be heard. The Meridian Assembly has voted to isolate Earth from 9 sectors of interstellar commerce. Today, Earth will show you what you are isolating yourselves from. The message reached the Meridian Assembly across 9,400 data streams in 47 languages simultaneously. Every frequency band the Concordance used for communication carried it. Every delegate terminal displayed it. Every administrative system that had a text interface showed the words in the delegate's native language, translated with the kind of precision that only years of linguistic preparation could achieve. No signal could be blocked. No channel could be shut down without shutting down the network itself. The message had not been introduced into the system from outside. It had been generated from within by infrastructure that was, technically and legally, part of the Concordance's own operational foundation. 52 relay stations, Voss's recorded voice said. built under civilian infrastructure exemption protocols over a period of 18 years, maintained continuously by Earth technicians operating under concordance auxiliary membership agreements, monitored around the clock by Earth operators whose shift logs have been filed correctly and completely with the Assembly's Infrastructure Committee every quarter for 18 years. In the Meridian Assembly chamber, delegates were reading overnight summaries when the cascade began. The broadcast did not ask permission. It arrived the way a tide arrives, not violent, not sudden, but inexorable and impossible to stop once it had begun. 14 communications satellites in the Concordance's primary merchant network. The satellites maintain the commercial frequencies your traders use to coordinate shipments across 11 sectors. Earth personnel design their navigation systems. Earth technicians perform all scheduled maintenance. Earth operators monitor them for signal degradation. They have never failed. They have never been late. They have been for 18 years simply there, working, maintained, invisible, unacknowledged. The chamber began to react, not all at once, not in unison. The reaction moved through the body the way understanding moves through any large group. First the people who already knew the technical details, then the people who could extrapolate from the details, then the people who could feel the weight of the extrapolation without yet understanding the specifics. First the technical delegates understood, not all of them, not at once. But the engineers and network architects in the lower rings stopped moving first, stopped the small adjustments of posture and tablet angle that delegates made constantly during administrative sessions, and went still, completely still, the kind of still that happens when a mind is running too fast for the body to keep up. Then the political bloc leaders, they understood second, because their job was not to read systems but to read rooms, and the room was changing. Then the voting members, the ones who had pressed their gestures of affirmation 40 minutes ago, who had voted 2,089 to 506 to sever a species they had dismissed as peripheral. They understood third, and their understanding arrived with the specific weight of something you cannot undo. The broadcast continued, no anger in Voss's voice, no pause for effect, just the next number. 52 relay stations feed power to 47 assembly outposts. Without those stations, the outposts do not lose efficiency, they go dark. 14 satellites maintain the merchant frequencies your traders use during transit. Without those satellites, the frequencies do not degrade, they become unavailable. 5 listening arrays have been feeding classified data to Assembly Security Services for 18 years. 8 mining operations on neutral planets depend on Earth-maintained equipment. 13 medical supply lines run through Earth logistics networks. 93% of your long-range communication arrays share power grids with Earth nodes. No warnings, no ultimatums, no mercy, only the calm recitation of what was. Velmoth, the 4,100-year-old Kelvani elder, leaned back in her station in the upper gallery. She had seen 3 empires rise, she had watched 2 of them fall. The third she had helped hold together through a succession crisis that had lasted 40 years. She knew what a load-bearing wall looked like. She knew what happened when someone tried to tear one out. Earth had not built a wall, Earth had become the foundation. Which meant the Assembly had a problem that no vote could fix. Archregent Zesek stood at the window. He had moved there 4 minutes into the broadcast, stepping away from the platform without a word, without acknowledging the breach in protocol that such movement represented. No one had called it out. No one had the words for it yet. He stood with his 3 arms at his sides and looked down at the communications array in the courtyard below, the towers and relay dishes and power conduits that he had walked past 700 times across 18 years of service without once asking who maintained them. Earth personnel, Earth technicians. Earth operators whose shift logs had been filed correctly and completely with the Assembly's Infrastructure Committee every quarter. He had been on that committee for 6 years. He had approved those logs. He had seen the designations, Earth Auxiliary Technical Staff Class 3. He had seen them and not seen them the way you stop seeing a door you walk through every day. The broadcast had 2 minutes remaining. In Cascadia Operations Hub, Voss watched the signal confirmation display. Every relay station green, every satellite locked. The Assembly's own network was carrying the message the way a river carries a stone dropped from a bridge, not because it chose to, but because that is what rivers do. She had been asked 3 years ago whether she was afraid of what would happen if it failed. She had thought about the question for a long time before answering. Not afraid, she had said finally. If it fails, we learn something true. If it works, we learn something truer. She had not said what she was afraid of if it succeeded. She was afraid of this, that the assembly would understand and would not change anyway. That certainty could survive even a direct confrontation with its own fragility. She had spent 3 years building toward this moment. She had not spent enough time thinking about what came after. The broadcast reached its final line. Voss's recorded voice, 3 years old, patient and clear. We chose to see you. You chose not to see us. A pause, 1 second, 2. But you are listening now. The signal closed. 14 minutes and 11 seconds after it had begun, the broadcast ended. The transmission crystal on Voss's desk went quiet, not dark, still warm, but no longer transmitting. The message had been received across all accessible channels. Earth's infrastructure was no longer hidden. It was visible. It was documented. It was not going away. In the assembly chamber, the silence lasted 4 minutes. Not the silence that follows a decision. Not the silence of a body moving toward its next act. The silence of 2,634 beings from 41 civilizations sitting inside a truth they had not been prepared to receive. Zesix remained at the window. He was not thinking about the vote. He was thinking about a maintenance log. He was thinking about 6 years on the infrastructure committee and the designations he had approved without reading, and the question he had never asked: who built this? Who keeps it running? Not because the answer was hidden, because the question had never seemed necessary. They stood one by one until the chamber was a sea of acknowledgement. Not all of them. The wave that moved through the rings of the assembly was not unanimous. Some delegates stayed seated, the ones still calculating, still running the political mathematics, still trying to find the outcome in which nothing had to change. But the wave did not need unanimity. It needed enough, and enough was rising. Velmoth stood first in the upper gallery. She was very old and she rose slowly, and every delegate who saw her rise understood what the gesture meant coming from her. She had lived through the collapse of 3 empires. She did not stand for small things. Then a veteran block leader in the 3rd ring. Then 7 delegates from the Kelvani Technical Council simultaneously, as though they had reached the same conclusion at the same moment without speaking. Then, in 1s and 2s and small clusters, the rest. By the time the wave reached the lower rings, 2,040, one of 2,634 delegates were on their feet. Zesix heard it. He did not need to turn from the window to know what the sound meant: the slow, asynchronous movement of 2,041 bodies shifting from seated to standing across the concentric rings of the chamber. He had been in this room for 186 cycles. He knew every sound it made. He turned anyway. The chamber looked different from this angle, from the side, not the platform. He had never stood here during a full session. The rings curved away from him in both directions, and from here he could see not just the delegates nearest the center, but the full sweep of the upper galleries, the farthest reaches of the chamber, the small figures in the highest tiers who were now standing too. 2,040, one out of 2,634. Not a unanimous verdict, but a clear one. His chitin was still dark. The bioluminescence had not returned. He walked, not with the authority stride he had used for 186 cycles, the long, deliberate step that broadcast certainty to every corner of the room. He walked the way a person walks when they are carrying something heavy and are not sure of the ground beneath them. Careful, deliberate, present in each step. The delegates who saw him coming moved back, not in fear, in recognition. They made space for a figure who was no longer quite the one who had walked away from the platform, and they did not yet know what to make of the difference. Velmoth watched him cross the floor. She had seen this walk before. Not from Zesix, from a thalassic regent 500 years ago during the succession crisis, the day he had finally acknowledged that the borders he had been defending were not the ones that mattered. It was the walk of someone who had reached the end of certainty and was choosing, deliberately, to keep moving anyway. She had not been sure Zesix was capable of it. She was still not entirely sure, but he was walking. "We have built our authority on something that was built for us," Velmoth said. Her voice was not loud. It did not need to be. The chamber's resonance systems carried it the same way they carried every voice from every delegate station, with the same precision and the same clarity. But the words reached further than the resonance systems could explain. They moved through the room the way a true thing moves, which is to say, not by force but by recognition. We cannot demand its removal without our own collapse. We cannot govern as though we are the only builders. We have just been shown very clearly that we are not. She did not say it as accusation. She did not say it with satisfaction. She said it as recognition, the way you name a thing that has always been true but has only just become visible. No one argued. There was nothing to argue with. A fact had been placed in the room. You could refuse to acknowledge it. You could not change it. Zesix reached the center platform. He stopped. His 3 arms hung at his sides. For 3 seconds he stood there while 2,634 delegates watched, and the chamber held the specific quality of silence that precedes a thing that cannot be taken back. Then his arms began to move. The gesture of equals, ancient, older than the assembly itself, older than the concordance, drawn from the pre-spaceflight traditions of Zesix's own species when 2 clan sovereigns of identical standing would meet at a shared border. 3 arms extended, palms open, angled neither upward in submission nor downward in dominance. Lateral, level, the gesture that said, I see you as I see myself, not above, not below, here. It had not been performed in the Meridian Assembly for 2,500 years. There would be no unmaking this moment. There would be no returning to the world that had existed 40 minutes ago. There would only be the new shape of things. Zesix spoke. His voice came through the dual resonance chambers the way it always had, the same chambers, the same architecture, the same room, but the voice itself was different. The certainty was gone from it. What remained was older than certainty, older than authority. It was the sound of a being who had decided to tell the truth. The embargo is void. A pause. 1 second. Earth is. His voice stopped. The hesitation was visible, a thing that had not happened at this platform in 186 cycles. He did not look away. He did not lower his arms. Earth is reinstated as equal partner in all concordance systems. This will be formalized within the cycle. The gesture held. His arms remained extended, palms open, level. In the gallery, Rachel of the veteran observer corps stood very still. She had attended 47 assembly sessions across her career. She had witnessed trade accords and territorial settlements and the formal censure of 3 sub-regent bodies. She was trained to record and report and withhold judgment. She withheld it now, technically, but she understood what she was seeing. This was not a political concession. This was not a negotiated outcome. This was the moment when the Concordance's 17,000-year narrative rewrote itself, not through conquest, not through force, not through the pressure of any army or fleet, through being forced to see what had always been there. Not through power, through presence. The assembly stood, most of it. Some delegates remained seated, calculation still running, pride still fighting. But 2,041 pairs of eyes across 41 species watched Zesix hold the gesture of equals. And one by one, the ones still seated felt the particular discomfort of being the only person in a room who has not yet acknowledged the obvious. Some of them stood, not all, but more. The gesture held for 30 seconds, then Zesix lowered his arms and the chamber exhaled. In Cascadia Operations Hub, Voss received the signal confirmation at 3:41 a.m. All channels, full reception. The broadcast had completed without interruption. The message had been heard. She poured herself a fresh coffee. She did not drink it immediately. She sat with it the way she had sat with the crystal for 3 years, present, steady, not quite believing the weight of what had happened was real yet. Her calm chimed, Commander Wren. All stations confirm, Dr. Voss. The Assembly has suspended the embargo order. Diplomatic channel request incoming from the Meridian Assembly Secretariat. She looked at the crystal on her desk, still warm. Always warm. That was the nature of the quantum lattice, a byproduct of the encoding process, a feature no one had designed. It had simply been warm since the day she first held it, and she had come to think of that warmth as the message itself, not the words, the fact of the message, the fact of a choice made, held, and finally delivered. Tell them we'll respond within the hour, she said. She picked up the crystal, set it down, picked it up again. There was a question she had not let herself ask for 3 years because the asking of it assumed the answer. What happens now? Not what happens to the embargo or to Earth's trade status or to the 17 formal committees that would spend the next 18 months working out the practical details of equal partnership. Those were solvable problems. She had spent her career on solvable problems. What happens now to a species that has spent 17,000 years building its authority on the assumption that it could see everything important and has just discovered it could not? She did not have the answer, but the question was open now. That was worth something. 3 weeks later. The formal notification arrived at Earth's diplomatic office at 09:14 a.m. GMT. Equal standing. Embargo reversed. Trade restrictions lifted across all 9 affected sectors. 1 voting seat in the Meridian Assembly to be claimed at Earth's discretion. Earth claimed it the same day. Voss sat in the assembly for the first time 6 days after that, in a delegate station in the second ring. Not the lowest tier, not the highest, exactly where the geometry of the chamber placed a new member of equal standing. The station had been empty for 18 years. It had been maintained. Of course it had. The assembly maintained everything. What the assembly had not done was ask who built the maintenance systems for the station's atmospheric regulator. The answer, Voss knew without checking, was Earth. Class 3 Auxiliary Technical Staff. Shift logs filed quarterly for 16 years. Some things did not change quickly. Archregent Zesek sat 2 stations to her left. He did not speak to her, not that session, not the next. But his chiton was steady when she entered the chamber, not dark, not faded. Steady with the even luminescence of a being who has made his peace with a difficult thing and is moving forward anyway. She did not need him to speak. She had not built 18 years of invisible infrastructure because she needed acknowledgement. She had built it because the work was necessary. The acknowledgement had come. That was enough. Commander Wren had asked her the morning after the broadcast whether she felt like they had won. She had thought about it for a long time, longer than the question probably deserved. Then she had said, "We made ourselves visible. That's not the same as winning. Winning implies the other side lost. What happened here is different. What happened here is that the truth became harder to ignore than the lie." Wren had nodded slowly. He was not entirely convinced. That was fine. She was not sure she was either. The transmission crystal was placed in the Assembly's archive 11 days after the vote. A small ceremony, unannounced. 3 delegates attended. Velmoth was one of them. The pedestal was stellarite, the same material as the chamber walls, dug from the same planet, part of the same 3-century-old construction project that had built this room. The crystal sat on it at eye level, which meant different things for different species, but everyone who stood before it could see the 47 grooves along its surface, one for each language the message had carried. Velmoth touched it. Her fingers were old. 4,000 years of careful use had worn them smooth. The crystal's surface was warm against them. "How did we not see?" she said, not a question. A fact stated aloud the way she stated most facts, without the lift at the end that would have made it a performance. The answer was simple. The answer was, because we did not look. Because the systems that worked without complaint were the systems we stopped asking about. Because the hands that fixed the things that broke were the hands we forgot to count. She did not say any of that. It was already in the crystal. 1,934 words in 47 languages, patient and clear, recorded 3 years before the moment that made them necessary. The light in the archive moved across the crystal's grooves as the day shifted. Morning light first, sharp and direct. Then the softer angle of midday. Then the long, low light of evening, which caught the facets differently, deeper, slower, the way old things catch evening light. Its warmth did not fade with the light. The quantum lattice held its heat the way it had always held it, independent of the room, independent of the hour. The message remained, the grooves remained, the archive remained. And outside, in the chamber where 2,634 delegates from 41 civilizations made decisions about the fates of worlds, an empty station in the second ring was no longer empty. The crystal sat in the dark, warm, still, holding everything.